I never expected a Tuesday morning to unfold like something out of a Hitchcock thriller. The sun was laying soft gold across our quiet suburban street. The birds were chirping, and somewhere in the distance a lawn mower hummed lazily. It was the kind of morning that almost convinced you life was peaceful. Almost. I was guiding my son Jamie down the driveway, careful not to bump his oxygen tank. It's a routine I've done hundreds of times. Check the tank. Make sure the feeding pump is steady. Lock the wheelchair brakes. At this hour, the neighborhood is usually silent. Most people are still asleep. Except Karen, apparently. Karen is the HOA president, or as I secretly label her, the suburban enforcer. She has an uncanny ability to materialize out of nowhere, usually with a scowl sharp enough to cut metal. Today she was marching down the sidewalk with purpose, like she'd been dispatched on some official mission. I gave her a polite wave, hoping the thin shield of courtesy might keep her away. "Morning," I called out, keeping my tone neutral. She stopped mid-stride, eyes narrowing at Jamie's medical equipment. "That pump doesn't belong there," she declared, pointing as dramatically as if she'd uncovered a crime scene. "It's unsightly. It violates HOA rules." I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" My voice cracked with a mix of disbelief and anger. "It's medical equipment. My son needs it to live." Karen tilted her head, as though I was missing some fundamental truth. "Rules are rules. It's an eyesore. You'll need to remove it." I let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh and nudged Jamie's chair closer to the curb. "You want me to take life-saving equipment away from my child? Do you realize that's illegal?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I swore I could hear gears grinding behind her heavily mascaraed eyes. Then she smiled, not kindly, not apologetically, but with the unsettling confidence of someone who thinks they've trapped you in some invisible snare. Before I could respond, she lunged forward and grabbed for the oxygen tank's carrier handle. Instinct kicked in. I jerked back, heart hammering. Jamie let out a startled squeak, and just like that, the peaceful suburban morning shattered. Karen stormed off toward the corner house, muttering something about enforcing HOA law, leaving me standing in the driveway, shaking and terrified. I had no way of knowing that this absurd, frightening encounter was about to spiral into a legal nightmare. By mid-morning, my nerves were shredded. I kept replaying the moment. Karen's piercing glare, her sudden grab for Jamie's oxygen tank, that smug smile that screamed, "I make the rules here." I tried to stay focused on my son adjusting his blanket, checking his feed pump, but every noise outside made me jump. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up our driveway. I peeked through the blinds. There she was again, clipboard in hand, marching like a general reviewing her troops, except the only troops were imaginary, and I was apparently the enemy. "Good morning," she chirped, sweet as sugar with venom underneath. "I'm here to conduct an inspection." I stepped onto the porch, forcing myself to stay calm despite the somersaults happening in my gut. "Inspect what?" "This is private property." "Oh, don't be difficult," she said, tapping the clipboard like it was some royal scepter. "I need to check for compliance, aesthetics, safety, community standards." I swallowed hard. "Karen, it's medical equipment. My son needs this. I am legally required to keep it accessible." Her brow tightened, but she didn't budge. "I don't care. HOA rules don't discriminate. That tank, the chair, the tubes, they're all non-compliant. Remove them or face consequences." Consequences. The word rang in my head like a threat. Jamie watched me with wide eyes, his tiny hands clinging to the wheelchair's armrests. He doesn't understand danger, but he recognizes fear, and I was terrified. "Karen," I said, stepping forward, "if you touch that equipment, it's theft. Do you even hear yourself?" She tilted her head, her signature Karen move. "Oh, I hear myself perfectly. This is community enforcement. Think of it as helping you." I let out a hollow, incredulous laugh. "Helping me? You're trying to steal my son's medical equipment." Her face hardened. Then, before I could react, she reached toward the wheelchair again. I lunged, blocking her hand. Jamie squeaked in alarm, and that's when the unexpected happened. The neighbor across the street, someone I had never met, stepped out onto their porch with their phone raised, recording everything. Karen froze mid-lunge, realizing she suddenly had witnesses. Her eyes flicked from the camera to me. "This isn't over," she hissed. Then she stormed away, muttering about grandstanding and setting an example. I collapsed onto the porch swing afterward, shaking as the adrenaline drained from my system, leaving an icy dread behind. This was only the beginning. The peaceful veneer of the neighborhood had cracked, and what came next would not be subtle. By the next morning, the tension in our house felt almost physical. Jamie had slept fitfully, twitching in his blanket, and I found myself checking the windows every few minutes like a jumpy guard dog. The confrontation with Karen felt surreal, yet something deep inside me insisted she wasn't done. Then the mail arrived. I nearly dropped everything when I saw the HOA letter. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was an official notice, stamped, formal, bureaucratic. The words blurred for a moment, but then I read them aloud, my voice tightening with disbelief. "Dear homeowner, the presence of non-compliant equipment on your property constitutes a violation of HOA rules. Failure to rectify immediately will result in legal action and potential fines." Legal action, fines. My mouth went dry. The equipment wasn't non-compliant, it was life-saving. Anyone with basic humanity would understand that. Anyone except Karen. I grabbed my phone, hoping the HOA office had at least one rational person willing to intervene. The receptionist was polite, but utterly useless. "All actions are in accordance with HOA policy," she repeated like a machine. My patience evaporated, replaced by a surge of fear and frustration. After hanging up, I turned to Jamie, who was watching me with those big, trusting eyes. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, forcing a smile. "Mommy's handling it. We're not doing anything wrong." But inside, panic churned. Then came a knock at the door. It was the neighbor from across the street, the one who filmed everything. She introduced herself as Mrs. Delgado, a retired attorney, and, as far as I was concerned, an angel disguised as a neighbor. "I saw what happened yesterday," she said quietly. "You need to document everything. All of it. Trust me, it's going to get worse." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. "I thought it would be over after she stormed off," I admitted. "Isn't that enough?" Mrs. Delgado shook her head slowly. "Karen doesn't stop at storming off. People like her don't stop, they escalate. And when they do, they don't understand limits or the law." Before I could even respond to Mrs. Delgado's warning, the doorbell rang again. My stomach dropped. I opened the door, and there she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, looking more determined than ever. Her fake smile was gone, replaced by a cold, unblinking glare that made my skin crawl. "I need that equipment removed immediately," she declared. "I've had reports. Reports. My thoughts spun. Who would report anything? But I realized too late that Karen had already laid her next trap. And this time, it wasn't about aesthetics. She stepped forward, crossing onto my porch without permission. With that single step, I knew the situation had shifted. This wasn't about HOA violations anymore, it was about control. Time slowed. Karen's boots clicked on the hardwood floor like a countdown to disaster. Jamie's eyes widened, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. My voice shook despite my efforts to stay calm. "Karen, you can't," she cut me off with a dismissive flick of her hand. "Rules are rules," she said casually, as if she weren't about to commit a crime. "I'm taking this for inspection." I froze. "Did she really?" "Yes," she snapped, as if hearing my disbelief. She reached for Jamie's feeding pump. Panic washed over me in a cold wave. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was theft. "Stop. That's illegal. You can't touch that." My voice cracked with desperation. But Karen tilted her head, wearing that infuriating "I know better than you" expression. "Oh, come on. It's just community enforcement. No harm done. No harm done." My son needed that equipment to live. I lunged forward, grabbing the pump before she could get her hands on it. Jamie squeaked in fear as the sudden movement jostled him. Karen's eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched, and unbelievably she tried to grab it again. We struggled, and the pump crashed to the floor. Tubes tangled, the motor buzzed unevenly. My heart pounded as I held it tight to my chest. Suddenly, Mrs. Delgado's voice sliced through the chaos. Karen, step back. Right now. Karen froze, turning toward the doorway, her expression contorting into annoyance and disbelief. And who's going to stop me? She spat. I'll call the police. Mrs. Delgado shot back. You're committing theft. Grand larceny. If you move another inch. Grand larceny? It sounded like a courtroom drama, not my quiet cul-de-sac. But Karen didn't seem to grasp the severity. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she might actually retreat. Then she muttered something about overreacting neighbors and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sank onto the floor beside Jamie, shaking. His tiny hand found mine. The adrenaline drained from my system, leaving fear and disbelief in its wake. Two things were clear. 1. Karen had no idea how serious her actions were. 2. The police were about to explain it to her. The officers arrived before noon, their patrol car lights reflecting off the pastel houses. I stood on the porch, heart pounding, as 2 officers approached with notepads ready. Jamie clung to my arm, sensing the tension. I explained everything: Karen entering our house, grabbing for the pump, and the damage she caused. I showed them the oxygen tank, the feeding pump, the dents and twisted tubing. The officers exchanged looks. This wasn't a neighborly spat, they knew it. So she tried to take your son's medical equipment? One asked, eyebrows raised. Yes, I said, voice rising. Do you understand what that means? She could have seriously injured him. The officer nodded, writing quickly. Ma'am, that's considered grand larceny, attempted theft of life-saving medical equipment. Very serious charges. I blinked. Grand larceny. We had gone from HOA drama to felony theft. Minutes later, Karen appeared again, this time without theatrics. She had a phone pressed to her ear, pacing, muttering something about protocol. The officers approached her. I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. Karen M? One asked. She looked up, startled. You're under arrest for attempted theft and violation of state laws regarding medical equipment. Her face went white. I didn't know, she stammered. It's just HOA enforcement. Ma'am, the officer said firmly. This is grand larceny, not HOA enforcement. You tried to steal a child's medical equipment. You're going to jail. She blinked rapidly, flustered, mumbling incoherent legal jargon she clearly didn't understand. As they led her toward the squad car, I felt something release inside me, the fear that had been gripping our home finally loosening. Jamie squeezed my hand, and I hugged him tightly. You're safe now, I whispered, though I knew the fight wasn't over. The legal process, the whispers, the fallout, they were coming. But the immediate threat was gone. The car pulled away with Karen still sputtering in disbelief. She had finally run into a law she couldn't bend to her will. But I also knew this wasn't the end of her chaos. By afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Some people offered sympathy. Others clung to HOA rules like talismans, still somehow missing the point. I ignored them all. Rules had nearly cost my son his life. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Karen posted bail, hired a lawyer, and claimed she was misunderstood. But the officers' reports, Mrs. Delgado's testimony, and the neighbors' footage painted everything in stark detail. She didn't take the equipment out of necessity, she did it out of a compulsive need for control. Court days were exhausting. Each one felt like a public dissection of my life. I sat beside Jamie, clutching my notes, praying I wouldn't break down in front of a room of strangers. Karen's attorney tried to downplay the incident, calling it a misguided attempt at HOA compliance. I clenched my jaw until it hurt. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Karen was sentenced to jail time for grand larceny, hefty fines, and mandatory community service. Relief washed over me, followed by a strange sadness. Sadness that someone could be so warped by control that they'd endanger a child over aesthetics. Walking home, Jamie giggled for the first time in days. His laughter, small, sweet, fragile, felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. We'd won the legal battle, but the emotional scars would linger. Still, the lesson was etched deeply. Sometimes, danger in the suburbs doesn't wear a mask. It comes in HOA letters and self-righteous smiles. That night, after tucking Jamie in, I checked every tube, every valve, every line on his equipment twice. I whispered a promise that no one would ever threaten his safety again. Looking out the window at the street where everything had started, I couldn't help but smirk at the absurdity of it all. Suburbia pretends to be peaceful, predictable, harmless. But all it takes is one person, one obsession, one terrible misunderstanding to turn a quiet cul-de-sac into a cautionary tale. We survived. And I learned that standing up for what's right, even in the smallest battles, can literally save a life. In our case, it did. The street is quiet again. Almost too quiet. But we're safe. And that's what matters. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like, because supporting everyday people who stand up against injustice truly matters. Subscribe to Karen's Hub for more real-life stories of courage and accountability. And tell me below, how would you handle a neighbor who crosses the line?